Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 31st of May of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory Ukraine. Today is the 31st of May, and probably the most important question that many people has that follows the special military operation: why the Russians still haven't attacked the territory Ukraine with hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles, as was announced by Russian authorities. We're talking about massive attack. So yes, the Russians still haven't attacked the territory Ukraine. This is a very interesting situation. You know that different military experts provide lots of different opinions why the things are developing like this. And you know that today I read a very interesting article, and today, according to this article, today is the Kiev Day. So today Ukraine celebrates, not Ukraine, but the city of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, celebrates the city of Kiev Day. So this is something like a holiday. And several experts came to conclusion that most likely the Russians haven't attacked the city of Ukraine, the capital of Ukraine, because the Ukrainians didn't attack Moscow during the 9th of May. So it seems that the Russians are returning the that. So the Russians asked Ukraine not to attack Moscow during the 9th of May, and now we see that now the Russians are not attacking the city of Kiev during the city of Kiev Day, which means that according to this logic, that's most likely tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, or probably even this upcoming night between the 31st of May and the 1st of June, the Russians will carry out a massive attack when this holiday ends. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next, because obviously we will understand about this situation within the next several hours. As of the previous 24 hours, both the Russians and the Ukrainians continued attacking each other. The Russians, according to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, used 229 drones, and the Ukrainians, according to the Minister of Defense of Russia, used during the previous night 216 drones to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. And as of the Ukrainian attack, we have a lots of very interesting signals. And once again, we have a lots of signals that say that in coming hours or in coming days, the Russians will carry out a massive attack. So it's like a pattern. Every time when Russia carry out massive attack through the territory Ukraine, Zelensky leaves the territory Ukraine. And according to information we have, Zelensky is not on the territory Ukraine right now. Another important thing is that always before the beginning of another massive attack, Zelensky talks a lot about Patriot missiles and Patriot systems. He always says that Ukraine doesn't have enough of missiles, they doesn't have missiles at all, and he's asking the Western countries to provide him missiles. So these days he was talking a lot about Patriot systems and Patriot missiles PAC-3. Another important thing is that always before the beginning of the Russian massive attack, Ukraine tries to attack the city of Saratov and the city of Engels, because there is an airfield for the strategic aviation that the Russians use to attack the territory Ukraine with the strategic aviation that uses cruise missiles of Ha-101 type. And during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians attacked the city of Saratov. More precisely, the Ukrainians attacked the Saratov oil refinery. And during the day, we received lots of videos on this maps, and here we can see the Saratov oil refinery, and it seems that the Ukrainians managed to hit hard this oil refinery and to deal significant damage. We have lots of pictures and lots of videos from different angles about the situation in this area, and as you can see, the Ukrainians managed to damage this oil refinery, and we see a fire broke out right after the Ukrainians attacked the territory. And once again, the Russians, their airfields, their aircrafts use oil and fuel, probably that stored on the territory of the Saratov oil refinery, which means that Ukrainians, by this attack, were trying to destroy this oil refinery or to destroy oil tanks or fuel tanks that the Russians were going to use for their strategic aviation. So the Ukrainians always does like this, they always do like this before any massive attack that the Russians always did like this before any Russian massive attack in the past.
Nu kan du lege din ladeboks hos Aura. For kun 159 kroner om måneden får du en komplet løsning.
Now let's move further. Also, during the previous 24 hours, we received several videos and updates from the central part of Russia. According to information we have, several objects of energy infrastructure of the Russian Federation were damaged in the central part, and here we have a video with the Ukrainian drone that was also flying through the central part of the Russian Federation. So as of these drones and as of this attack, probably nothing special. The most important thing is the situation in the area of Saratov and in the area of the settlement of Matveyev Kurgan. The sources stated that the Ukrainians also attacked this object of infrastructure, and as a result of attack, several oil depots or fuel tanks were damaged or destroyed. The Russians also were attacking the territory of Ukraine during the previous 24 hours, and as we discussed during the previous video, now the Russians are concentrated on logistic hubs because the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours revealed this picture, and according to this picture, now everybody in the world knows that the Ukrainians don't use static launching sites. The Ukrainians use mobile trucks. The Ukrainians use mobile trucks that can have up to 3 drones, and this is probably something like this is how this schema works. This is how everything looks like. The Ukrainians use these mobile trucks. They can move these mobile trucks to any part of Ukraine, and from this point the Ukrainians can attack in any direction. So that is why the Russians understand the situation. They understand how exactly everything works, and that is why the Russians these days continue hunting and attacking trucks, these parking sites. The Russians attack logistic hubs, so the Russians attack places where these trucks can be located. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked the Chernigov region, and as a result of attack, as we can see, the hits and the parking lots containing trucks were destroyed. So here we can see the consequences of the overnight attack. Nobody knows for sure whether these trucks had the drones or not, but the Russians destroyed it because the Russians know the schema and the Russians know how exactly everything works. Here we have more pictures from these parking lots. As you can see, trucks were destroyed. Another important attack took place in the area of the city of Dnipro, and here we have the same story. The Russians discovered concentration of trucks on the territory of the city of Dnipro, and the Russians attack the territory of Nova Poshta. So this is something like a post office that was completely destroyed, and here we have the consequences of attack. The post office was completely destroyed without any chances to save and to stabilize the situation. In this video, we can see, as we discussed during the previous video, more trucks that were destroyed by Russians, and it seems that the Russians will continue attacking trucks, truck stations, logistic hubs, and post offices through the territory of Ukraine, because the Russians know how exactly everything works. And this is a very big problem for the Ukrainians, because now they need to think and now they need to change their tactics, because during these attacks on parking lots, on trucks, the Russians destroy not just trucks that Ukraine uses for the drones purposes, but of course with these attacks the Russians deal significant damage to business of Ukraine, which makes a lot of problems for business owners and so on. And due to the current economical situation in Ukraine, obviously this is not a very good situation.
Det er sgu egentlig ret sjovt med det der aktiemarked, ikke? Altså, det handler om at bruge sin egen dømmekraft og kigge.
Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates. And probably one of the most important situation is developing right now in the area of the Zaporozhye nuclear power station. Russian sources today stated that Ukrainian armed forces drone struck the turbine building of Unit 6 of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. A hole appeared in the wall of the unit, but the main equipment was not damaged. The Russians are saying that these days the Ukrainians began bombing and attacking the city of Energodar significantly. And Russians later emphasized that if the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is destroyed by a Ukrainian attack, the response could be a symmetrical strike against Ukrainian nuclear power plants. And you see that these statements were made right before the end of the city Kiev day, which means that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So during the next massive attacks, the Russians may attack nuclear power plants on the territory that is under control of the armed forces of Ukraine. That can lead to additional round of escalation, of course. Now let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, lots of updates were recorded. As you can see, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the city of Orechov, reducing the settlement to ruins. I would like to remind you that according to pro-Russian sources, the southern parts of the city, everything to the south of railways, is already under complete Russian control, and that according to several pro-Russian sources, the clashes are taking place for the northern parts of the city, and the Russians, as you can see, are reducing the northern parts of the settlement to ruins. During the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were published on this matter. The Russians use aviation, the Russians use everything just with the purpose to reduce and destroy these buildings and the citadel of the city of Orechov itself. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation from the settlements of Vozdvizhivka and Verkhnya Tersa in the western direction. And right before we started making this video, several pro-Russian sources adjusted their maps, and these adjustments are very interesting. Tomorrow we will discuss these adjustments in details, but according to different sources, during the previous 48-72 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly, and the Russians entered the settlements of Lesnoye and Lubitska, which are located to the west of the settlements of Risdvyanka and Vozdvizhivka. So the Russians, after they finished battle for this defense layer, continued offensive operation further, and now the Russians are trying to cut logistic lines and the T0408 logistic line that the Ukrainians used to supply their contingent on the territory of the Orechov agglomeration. So the major Zaporozhye offensive operation has begun, and the Russians continue advancing. Now the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over the territory along this red line, which will allow the Russians to improve their positions around the Orechov agglomeration and to take the main lines, to take the main logistic lines under complete fire control.
Til dig, der var ung i 80'erne. Til dig, der husker energikriserne og bilfri søndage.
Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kostiantynivka direction. The situation is critical, and today, according to information we have, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine arrived in Kostiantynivka sector. The situation there is deteriorating for the Ukrainian armed forces, and Ukraine is attempting to stabilize it. So Syrsky have arrived, and this is a very, very bad signal for defenders of the city of Kostiantynivka. And because now everybody understands that nobody is going to allow anybody to withdraw positions from the city. Now, because Syrsky arrived in this area, he will take obviously control over the battle for the city of Kostiantynivka in his hands, just with one purpose: to win as much as possible time. So which means that the Ukrainians who are currently located in the Metallurg micro-district 92nd and 83rd quarters most likely will not be allowed to leave these, let's say, blocks further in the northwestern direction with the purpose not to be caught by the Russians in Cauldron. So this is the most important thing. But from the other side, the Russians also understand that a decisive moment has started, has occurred. Now the Russians most likely will increase their pressure with the purpose to break through Ukraine's defense completely and to begin the battle for Alexeyevka-Drushkovka. We need to understand that the city of Kostiantynivka is a very important city because this is a very big city, first of all, and the second thing is that the city of Kostiantynivka, control over the city of Kostiantynivka, opens the way towards the settlement by the name of Drushkovka. As for the Kramatorsk-Slaviansk agglomeration, the settlement of Drushkovka is the most important settlement because if Russians, as a result of offensive operation, are able to establish complete control over the settlement of Drushkovka, first of all, we understand that this means that the battle for Kramatorsk begins. This is the first thing. But the second thing is that Russians, if they control the settlement of Drushkovka, most likely will continue offensive operation further in the northwestern direction, not directly in the direction of the city of Kramatorsk, but the Russians would try to outflank the settlement of Kostiantynivka from the west and from the southwest, trying to take under complete control these territories between the city of Dobropolye, Drushkovka, and Kramatorsk. So we're talking about these territories. And of course, we understand that if Russians are able to outflank the settlement of Kramatorsk this way, obviously the Russians would be able to encircle the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine through the Kramatorsk-Slaviansk agglomeration. And probably by the time the Russians begin the battle for Drushkovka, we'll see most likely significant progress on the ground of the group of forces west through the Liman direction. And most likely from these positions, the Russians would try to do the same. They would try to encircle the Kramatorsk-Slaviansk agglomeration, trying to outflank positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, probably by taking under complete control of these territories. And then the Russians most likely would try to create a cauldron for the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of these two cities and of the Kramatorsk-Slaviansk agglomeration. So most likely this is the plan that the Russians are going to implement, because once again it is very important for Russians to save cities like Kramatorsk and Slaviansk, to save as much as possible. Of course, if the Russians understand that they have no chances to save these cities, of course, they will reduce them to ruins, and this is exactly what, according to the military logic of the armed forces of Ukraine, must happen. The Ukrainians will try to fight for these territories for as long as possible because they understand that as a result of these clashes, as a result of the battle for the city of Kramatorsk and Slaviansk, these two cities could be reduced to ruins, could be completely unpopulated, and the most important thing, both the Russians and the Ukrainians would suffer huge and maybe even critical losses that will not allow anybody, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians, to continue the conflict and the special military operation. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were also recorded. These days we have a huge activity of Russians through the northern and the northwestern parts of the city. These are the changes on the ground between the dates. As we can see, the Russians improving their positions in this area and forcing the Ukrainians to fall back from the city of Kostiantynivka. And the Russians continue offensive, and we believe that in coming days we'll receive additional changes on the ground. The Russians are improving their positions on the Ukrainian side of the river Voskol, and most likely the Russians will continue doing this in the future. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians began bombing and attacking the settlement of Bely Kolodys significantly using aviation. In this video, we can see several bombs that were dropped by Russians on positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the city. And always, if Russians begin bombardments, this means that the Russians begin their offensive operation in this area. In this video, we can see another moment from the settlement of Bely Kolodys, and here we can see how Russians dropped bombs on positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. So, which means that the battle for Bely Kolodys begins. As for the Sumy direction, here we have also lots of explosions, but from not a classical direction. The Russians began bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine to the west of the settlement by the name of Tyotkina. We haven't received anything from this direction probably since 2022. No clashes, no military activity was recorded neither from the Russian nor from the Ukrainian side. And now these days we start receiving first updates from this territory. It seems that the Russians probably are going to begin their buffer zone operation to the west of the settlement of Tetkino with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back, or with the purpose to cut railways that go from the from the settlement of Konotop in the direction of the city of Kiev. Most likely the Ukrainians still have possibilities to use locomotives to supply and support the city of Sumy, so that is why the Russians probably would try to cut these railways physically with the purpose to stop the logistic process before the beginning of a major battle for the city of Sumy itself. And that's it